Hi, I'm Christy McDonald, and here's what's coming up this week on One Detroit. A year since the assault on the Capitol marks deeper reflection of where we stand as a nation and a closer look at the aftermath of the 2020 election here in Detroit that started it all. Join us for this special hour as One Detroit, in collaboration with the Detroit Free Press, trace the days following the election, talk with Michigan congressional leaders, and look ahead at the strength of our democracy. It's all coming up on One Detroit.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, MASCO Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. MASCO, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support for this program is provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV, the KRESGE Foundation, Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Also brought to you by, and viewers like you.
Hi there, and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining me. We are on at a special time tonight to mark a sobering anniversary, the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol building. The sight was shocking. Angry Americans broke through barricades and forced their way into the Capitol to stop the certification of the 2020 electoral votes back on January 6, 2021. One police officer, 4 others were killed, while lawmakers hid and feared for their lives. In the years since, there are investigations into what happened and how much responsibility former President Donald Trump bears for stoking the big election lie and calling into question the results. Countless investigations did not find voter fraud. The Associated Press just recently released a report that showed in the 6 battleground states, Michigan included, there were less than 475 total cases of voter fraud in 6 states, not nearly enough to throw the results. But that still hasn't changed how many people feel about the election, where we stand as a democracy, and the concern on all sides over how our votes count in the future. Over the last year at One Detroit, we collaborated with the Detroit Free Press to take a look back at the days following the election in Michigan, the threat of mistrust that happened in Michigan and other battleground states, and culminated at the U.S. Capitol months later. Coming up tonight over the next hour, you'll see part 1 in our series that focuses on the count at the TCF Center from the Free Press reporters who were on the scene. Plus, our One Detroit contributors, Nolan, Finley, and Stephen Henderson, meet up to talk about our political divide here in Michigan. Also, you'll hear from Democratic Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence and Republican Congressman Fred Upton, both Michigan lawmakers who were at the Capitol on January 6th. And then I meet up with the editor of the Detroit Free Press, Peter Badia, and the dean of the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy, Michael Barr. We take a look at combating misinformation and encouraging more citizen involvement. It's all ahead. We're starting with the first installment of our series with the Detroit Free Press called Election 2020, Detroit to D.C., on what happened election night when all eyes turned to Detroit.
Everyone was expecting things to start out red and then turn blue sort of overnight as we start getting in other votes from different areas.
Let's look at Michigan. Right now, with about 1/3 of the expected vote in, the president is ahead in Michigan.
If you're not super familiar with the process,
so it's going to be a kind of back and forth.
So you go to bed Tuesday night and everything looks good for Trump, and you wake up the next morning and things are looking better for Joe Biden.
This is 5 a.m. One more. Michigan as well.
Trump was saying, well, this had to be fraud because, at 10:30 we were ahead by 100,000 votes, and then by 2 o'clock in the morning, now all of a sudden we're behind by 100,000 votes.
We're just getting this. These are people bringing them in coolers. There's no one around.
We started seeing evidence online that these were magic votes, that somebody showed up somewhere with a whole bunch of blue votes.
Looks like one of those lock boxes. I wish I could tell.
Yeah, there were a number of viral images and videos purporting to show mysterious suitcases and wagons being brought into the TCF Center carrying ballots. So one of them actually turned out to be a WXYZ photographer carrying in his camera equipment.
I think all the polling places were closed. And yet we have a box.
All of this happened where people felt like, something happened in the dead of night.
There were thousands of ballots that arrived at the TCF Center early in the morning on Wednesday, November 4th.
All right, could you please state your name?
My name is Shane Trejo.
What days this year were you involved with the election?
I served as a poll challenger on the night shift after the election had concluded. So I was there at TCF as a poll challenger. The ballots showed up at the dead of night at 3:30 a.m. 61 boxes of mystery ballots show up from the city clerk's office. There was no chain of custody, no transparency, no accountability. No one would answer any questions about where they came from. And in my opinion, this was when they started the vote steal and to take this away from President Trump, because
early in the morning on Wednesday, November 4th, far from being a sign of anything nefarious, it's actually a sign of the system working as intended. Election officials had warned that it was going to take a while for all of the ballot verification steps to be completed.
If you don't understand how their process works, then it's easy for somebody to say, oh, I saw a van pull up in the middle of the night and unload a bunch of boxes, and you to be like, see, there was something going on there, even if, there's nothing nefarious about it. That's just the process.
Let's see, that's where we're at, folks.
Introduce yourself, tell us where we're at.
All right, Yes, I am Teresa Baldus. I'm a reporter of the Detroit Free Press, and I am reporting live from the TCF Center behind me, as I said, where they are counting. The city of Detroit has 25,000 absentee ballots that are still being counted. They anticipate that this will be counted by the end of the night. Also, 96% of the votes in Michigan have been counted now.
That night, or actually it started the day when they said, you keep hearing this call, get to the TCF, get to the TCF.
We are witnessing what everyone expected to be a historic vote count.
And this was intense. Election day became election week. And we were prepared for it to be election week. It became election month.
That was one of the biggest epiphanies I had after the 2020 election, was just how many people needed to go back to civics class and understand how an election works and how it runs, because for most people it's just one of those things that happens behind closed doors. It's the sausage making, and all they know is they go pick it out and then they cook it and eat it.
All eyes are on the city of Detroit as the Biden campaign hopes and has counted on the largely African-American vote in Detroit to pull Biden through.
The reporters are down there, they're watching it because no one's ever seen anything like this. This is all new for everyone, quite frankly. And I've covered lots of presidential campaigns, and this was just something that was unprecedented.
As the presidential campaign started to ramp up, you had President Trump saying, the only way I'm going to lose to this guy is if the election is stolen, if the election is rigged.
The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
That idea was kind of baked in even before they started counting the votes.
The pandemic kept a lot of people from going to the polls personally. And then, of course, you had Donald Trump encouraging his supporters, no, don't vote absentee, go to the polls. And so those two dynamics were playing out on election night.
We also had a record turnout in Detroit, the most in 20 years, even from the Obama presidency, a 55% voter turnout.
I think anybody that's watched Michigan politics for more than like a week understands that Detroit is a Democratic hotspot. There are not hundreds of thousands of Republican votes to get out of Detroit. Wayne County hasn't gone for a Republican president since Herbert Hoover in the 20s. Nobody in Michigan watching politics thought that Donald Trump had any chance to do anything in Detroit or in Wayne County. And yet, almost the entirety of the focus of alleged fraud in Michigan focused on TCF Center, where only ballots in Detroit were being counted, not in Wayne County, just in Detroit.
I remember an email going out to conservative activists saying, you've got to get down to Detroit, there's something happening down there.
There were messages spreading around in Republican circles to go storm TCF Center because Biden was pulling ahead of Trump and to observe the count and make sure that nothing nefarious was happening in Detroit.
And all of a sudden, just this crowd of people starting to just merge onto the scene there.
That day started out, I mean, it was crazy. I went in there and I was shocked at how easy we could get in. They had a spot designated for the media. We were all standing, you know, there were more than 100 of us. National media was in a corner.
Using a long lens because we are behind this orange tape line.
We're really far back from the counting, and we're not there to distract, but it is harder to cover in a granular way. And so we really just wanted people to be part of watching this vote count.
We're staying live just ahead. You, the public, our readers, our viewers, our subscribers, keep an eye on the process here.
But there's this massive room with tables, and people are all counting the ballots. But just roaming freely on the floor were all these challengers, hundreds of them.
Where are you from?
Oh, I'm from downriver.
Okay.
I'm here because of the 38,000 ballots that arrived here at 3:45 a.m. that are just now sitting over there and getting counted, supposedly.
Okay.
And that's why I arrived.
Okay.
And I didn't quite process that. Wait, these people are just regular, normal people off the street who walked in here, presented a badge with whatever party they were with, and said, I'm a challenger. There was no security to go through, no metal detectors. Anybody could have gone in with anything. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking. So finally, I stood at this table and I said to the woman, what are you doing? She said, I'm checking in people as they come in. So I decided to stand there and count them as they came in, you know, and then the numbers were going up and up and up and up. The craziest it got were in the middle of folks counting the ballots, you'd get a big group of Republican challengers that would form a circle around one table.
Some chanting going on.
And they'd start chanting, stop the count, and clapping as they did it.
And as you can see right now, we've got several police officers heading out there on the floor.
And the police would come in, they'd escort them out.
The number of Republican vote watchers were removed from the hall. And so a group of angry protesters came down and started banging on the windows of the basement of, you know, where we were at.
And then you'd have people complaining, we got kicked out of the process. Well, you were chanting in the middle of the floor and causing a scene.
We want all the Republican challengers out of this room.
A lot of conspiracy theories that were being thrown at us. And there was also a directive from folks. They said, challenge everything. Challenge every ballot. And they were doing it. They were, you know, well, this doesn't look good because of this or because of that. And at some point, you know, someone had to step in and say enough.
So all of this fervor is kind of coming up around Detroit and focusing on Detroit. Obviously a Democratic apparatus and supposedly, you know, part of this cabal to undermine the election. And so this is happening. Lawsuits are starting to come out. Lawsuits that have national resonance are being filed in Michigan.
The campaign says it has, quote, not been provided with meaningful access to numerous counting locations to observe the opening of ballots and the counting process as guaranteed by Michigan law. Now, it's asking the state's Court of Claims to stop counting ballots until, quote, meaningful access has been granted.
I've been trying to talk to some of these challengers who are out here. Some of them are very skittish about talking, but what we are learning is that the people who are getting thrown out, and several have been now escorted out of here, what they're doing is one of the following. They either are getting too close, or they're going up behind people and they're saying things like, listen, I'm challenging this ballot. There's litigation. I'm challenging this ballot. There's litigation. They keep citing that there's litigation out there. Well, there are lawyers working at these tables, and they will look at these challengers and say, you know what? It doesn't matter if there's litigation out there. This ballot is being counted.
There's wall-to-wall people in here. Nothing is being obscured about this process. We are all watching it. We're observing it. The citizens of Michigan, the media.
I'm Mandy Wright with the Detroit Free Press. I'm outside of the TCF absentee ballot counting, and there are several poll watchers who are really disgruntled right now.
So the next thing you know, you see more police presence. and they decide that the room is getting too filled.
They're at capacity now. As soon as they count down, they'll let some people in. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I need you just to step back a little bit. Thank you. Make a hole so people can come in and out of the building, emergency personnel.
Behind these glass doors and a glass wall, they were telling people, we're closing down the room, you can't come back in.
At this point, we have 134 spots for each group. 134 Republicans, partisan, 134 Democrat, partisan, 134 nonpartisan. That is the max, okay?
Summer Woods, she was the person who was in charge of maintaining order inside the hall, keeping it fair and square in terms of who was at each table watching these vote counters.
So at this point, we are not letting any more affiliations to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And we only have spots for about 52 more people in non-partisanship group.
What about the people who did not sign
So,
out?
but
What about the people who did not sign out?
Everybody stop.
So at the end of the day,
She tried to calm the crowd down by talking very specifically about what was happening and who was allowed in and who wasn't. And we're also dealing with COVID too. So it was also like balancing the safety numbers too.
I need for you all, hold on.
Well, people started to lose their minds.
You don't know what a socialist country is.
Screaming, you know, we're not being allowed to witness this process.
With a nonpartisan.
And she yelled, everybody back up.
Back up off the door.
What
So
about
if
the
you
people
are
who
Republican
never signed out?
or Democrats, back up off the door. Only non-partisan at this point.
You never told people to sign out, so you don't know how many are in there. That is a lie.
Our job here is to do nothing but make sure the name that's on the ballot is the name that's on the poll book. That's all we're here for. And we're being blocked from doing our function. Excuse me? They do, but they don't have one at every precinct. And I've heard it said many times, as a Republican leaves, they're not replacing them with another Republican. They're stopping us from having fair representation at each table.
You have a flood of Republican challengers who were here earlier, who stepped out either to get lunch or go to the bathroom, and now they can't go back in. So they're frustrated, which is understandable, but security is coming out and saying, listen, we're at capacity, you're stuck out here.
As they're coming out, we try to go in and they say, sorry, we're at capacity, which if anybody knows, click a 5 out, 5 can go in. I mean, anyone who's been at Somerset Mall recently knows that's how it works. 5 people come out, 5 people go in.
Are you concerned that something's going wrong then? Or do you feel the process is working?
I'm not in there. I'm a Democratic
Okay.
representative. I can't get in either.
Okay.
And I was there this morning. And I'm a lawyer and I can't get in.
Each side is only allowed 134 challengers in the room. Right now, both parties have more than 200. I think the Democrats had 268 and the Republicans had 230. And the nonpartisans had like 75, so they could have more people in there.
The number of challengers in the room far exceeded the allowed limit under state election law.
We're certified poll challengers and they're not letting us in. What are they telling you? They're telling us that they're not letting anyone else in but media and lawyers.
Just on the other side of those windows there have been pounding on the windows, at one point saying stop the count. Their objection right now is saying that there's various violations going on.
And then you had one of the Fox News reporters who was there live on the floor next to me, you know, not checking them, not saying, no, actually, they're here right now. I can watch them. I can see them.
We haven't seen any of that. We cannot independently confirm that, but the allegation is that these poll challengers or these challengers on the Republican side are not being allowed in to observe the counting process while the Democrats are. Again, we cannot confirm that.
I want to jump in the live shot and say, what the hell are you talking about? You know, they're right here, but of course I can't. That's their show. And I couldn't wait to just set that record straight.
There was some misinformation that was really becoming now a part of a bigger conspiracy that somehow things were not operating properly in the TCF.
People were not only banging on the windows, but they were taking their phones and they were videotaping the counters as they were counting the ballots. Well, A, that's not allowed, and B, it was intrusive and bothersome. So the ballot counter said, listen, these folks outside the windows are videotaping me. So they taped up the windows.
One major hub for counting ballots in Detroit covered up the windows again. with large pieces of cardboard.
It riled people up for sure, because all of a sudden, you know, in the mind of somebody who thinks that they're already being shut out of a process, you put up a piece of paper so that they can't see it, they're like, oh, they're hiding something.
And so they wanted to protect and block the counting area. They didn't want anybody seeing the counting, even though these were observers who were legal observers that were supposed to be there.
I've heard from other clerks that this is actually standard. In some municipalities, they do tape up the windows when they count the absentee ballots. They cover them up so no one can see. And then you have people from both sides in there to ensure that, you know, there's no foul play.
While my colleagues were in the counting room at the TCF Center observing what was happening there, I started to see all of these posts on Facebook going viral.
They're not letting us in.
Cheaters. That's what they are, cheaters. I knew they were going to cheat their way up to the top.
And that was sort of a claim that got rehashed over and over again.
I had some friends inside. They said they wouldn't even let them approach the table, and they said the few Republicans that were there were 3 Democrats for every 1 Republican.
Two media outlets just interviewed me. They said there are people in there. I said, yeah, they're treating them like crap.
The president said that in a national address Thursday of election week.
And our campaign has been denied access to observe any counting in Detroit.
We all witnessed the same thing, but people come away with different interpretations of what happened. And I don't know how you can misinterpret 450 challengers freely roaming the floor and then come around and claim that challengers were not allowed to be in the room. That just didn't happen.
A lot of our stories came down to fact checking because there were so many of these claims that were going back and forth that we wanted to set the record straight, but we wanted to try to present it as objectively as possible, you know, just the facts. And this is what happens. But there are people, you know, who no matter what you tell them, you know, sky's blue. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not. Sky's blue. No, it's not.
Detroit is another place. And I wouldn't say has the best reputation for election integrity.
You hear this regularly that, you know, Detroit is messed up. Detroit can't handle an election. Detroit's got problems galore. Well, Detroiters who were there that night were just pissed. They're like, you know what? This last election, when it swung in your favor, you were okay with how we counted the ballots. This time around, you're having a fit. I interviewed a lot of people who were working. A lot of them were nervous. A lot of them were like, okay, you know, it's always tense, but I just went about my job. But there was a lot of resentment at being questioned and scrutinized in that way.
In my past experience with that would be 2000 and the hanging chads in Florida. You didn't have Facebook and Twitter and all of these places where people could really spread as much fairy tales as they wanted.
For a lot of people, this wasn't rational. This was very personal. For a lot of people, they felt that they were losing something. They took these losses very personal. They took the theories of, massive fraud very personal because there was so much of this backstory that they didn't understand. This was their last stand, quote unquote. This was you're fighting for the soul of this country.
You're a Detroit Free Press subscriber. You've gotten a push alert. Kristen Jordan Seamus is going to update us. What do we know?
Well, what we're hearing right now is that the Detroit Free Press has called Michigan for Joe Biden. The Republicans and Donald Trump are leading right now in Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. But those states are all still too close to call.
Thanks so much, Kristen.
Thank you.
With me now are One Detroit contributors Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, and Stephen Henderson, host of American Black Journal. You know, guys, when you watch that story, I think mostly about the process of vote counting, who can be a challenger, and really how fast misinformation can spread. Stephen, what were your thoughts coming out of this?
Well, I mean, it brought back really bitter memories, and I think bitter is the right word. I mean, the challenge to the idea that Detroiters were voting, that African-American Detroiters were voting, was completely unfounded and based on racist mythology. And you know, the challenges to the votes, the hoopla outside, trying to disrupt all of it. It was completely inappropriate. And as somebody who's the son of somebody who didn't get to vote in this country until the Voting Rights Act passed, it reminds me of the same kinds of arguments that got made before about illegitimacy and Black voters.
Nolan, what were some of your perceptions?
Well, I think that 2020 was a very difficult time to have an election, and all of the rapid changes, all of the new procedures that were put in place created an atmosphere of mistrust, and that's never good. And so a lot of people saw things, they misinterpreted, thought they saw things they didn't see. And I think that speaks to why we need to address transparency. We need to be very careful in explaining anytime we change how voting is done and how vote counting is done, people need to understand what they were seeing. And clearly they didn't understand or didn't want to understand what they were seeing that night.
Have we learned from it in moving forward, Stephen?
No, I would like to say we have, and in some ways, I think the local reaction to it has been really great. I mean, we've got a Secretary of State in Michigan who's really focused on trying to make sure that there aren't reasons to question, and trying to tighten up procedures so that things that have gone on for years and years and years that aren't as clear to the public as they should be are made clear. But at the same time, we have a really concerted effort by the people who perpetrated the misinformation on election night in 2020 to carry that over into 2022 and especially into 2024, both through legislation that they've been trying to pass and posts that they're trying to win where they can question the outcome of votes.
I think we tend not to learn anything in Michigan except how to fight, and that's what we're doing now. There's no reason that the two parties can't get together and decide what changes actually need to be made in the voting process, what things need to be put in place, what steps to make sure the vote is secure and there is integrity in the elections. I think nobody will give an inch here in this state on so many issues, including voting.
We're going to talk about some of those challenges to voting access and to process that are happening not only in Michigan, but across the country right now, and how that really contributes to how we feel about our democracy and if government is really working for us right now. But I do want to say that each one of you talked to a member of our congressional delegation. Stephen, you talked to Brenda Lawrence, and Nolan, you talked to Fred Upton. Both were there at the Capitol on January 6th, and they talk about their work now in DC a year later. Let's go ahead and take a listen to those interviews.
On January 6th at the US Capitol, you were there while this insurrectionist mob was trying to interrupt the official counting of votes in the presidential election. Let's go back to that day for a second and just talk about what that was like.
So, Stephen, one of the things that just really stood out as I try to suppress this memory is the words from the sergeant at arms, "They're headed our way." I had not seen TV. I know they had whisked out Nancy Pelosi, so I figured something was really serious. And they said they had locked the doors and they said, "They're headed our way. Find shelter. Someplace to protect yourself." And it was, it was surreal. Then they told us, put on the gas mask. And I didn't even know under the seats that we sit on all the time to vote in the Capitol chambers were gas masks. So I'm trying to put on this gas mask. And then you hear this banging at the door. And it's vibrating because the door is locked and it is a mob. You can hear them screaming and they're banging on the door. And I'm looking around saying, oh my God, am I going to die today? What in the world is happening? At that point, Capitol Police came in with their guns drawn and said, everybody exit this way. So it was the opposite end of the chamber. So the chamber has about 6 or 8 doors that you can get into to come on the floor. And it was the opposite end. Their guns are pulled and they're telling everybody, move, move, go, go, go. And Democrats and Republicans. So this is the point I want everyone to understand. This was not a partisan moment. And I tell people it's probably the most nonpartisan moment I've seen on the Hill lately, where Democrats and Republicans were literally running down back staircases and hallways to get to some place of safety. We were literally running because I had to grab a hand of one of the staff because she was older and she wasn't able to run. And I just pulled her and said, we gotta go, we gotta go. TCF and what happened here on the Hill and the Capitol was not the America I know. I was raised by a Southern woman who lived through the civil rights and Jim Crow laws, who took her right to vote as one of the most precious gifts of being an American. I was taken by the hand every election day to stand next to my grandmother as she voted so she could teach me, and she would constantly say, this is what will protect your rights and freedoms in America. And as an American citizen, you must vote. And so we call it the big lie, to see criminal behavior and to see just people who are misinformed to the point where we saw an attack on our democracy. And that's what all of this summed up to be, an attack on our democracy, which is so unacceptable, so disappointing. And it's just not the America that I know and I love.
So, Congressman, you were in the Capitol on January 6th when the demonstrators poured in. Where were you when that incident began?
So the speaker actually asked, because of COVID, no more than 80 members of the 435 be on the House floor. So I decided, I've seen this a number of times. Normally I was there on the floor when they would count the electoral ballots, but I would let freshmen, the new freshman, Peter Meyer from Michigan, one of them, to be on the House floor. I went back to my office and then watched it on TV. And the interesting point of fact here was I'm one of the couple members that actually has a balcony in the Rayburn building. So it overlooks the mall. And I saw all the protesters taking the subway to the Capitol South metro stop, walk then down to the White House, 16 blocks, not all that far. It was a cold morning, and then walk back. And I was out on my balcony watching much of this. And in fact, the National Guard, the state police, all of those folks literally came and emptied out from their vehicles right below my office as I watched this thing unfold that afternoon.
Now, Congressman, from your perspective, having been there that day, was this a riot? Was this a demonstration? Was this an insurrection? How would you categorize it?
No, I would call it an insurrection. They knew what they were doing. Yeah, there was a lot of mob. I'm sure there were some people that sort of got caught up into it, but there were thousands of people. I mean, tens of thousands of people is my guess. I watched the president's speech on my TV from my office and went out again back and forth to my balcony, which I left the door open. The individuals were cleared out about 6 or 7 o'clock that night. And this thing started about 2:30. So I watching it on my TV and my C-SPAN in my office, I saw when the speaker literally said, "Let's get out of here." I knew that the chamber had been broached. And after it was quiet, I would say, I went over to the Capitol an hour or two before votes started again. It was important to finish the job on January 6th. I spent time talking to the SWAT team folks. They had been beaten up. They were just literally lying on the floor, and there was broken glass. You saw the vestiges of what they did. And certainly afterwards, not only do we have a Capitol Hill policeman from my hometown, St. Joe Benton Harbor, that I spent time with, but also spent some time with the other officers that were there, literally hours, as they described to me, what happened. One of them telling me as they literally dragged him out of the Capitol door, shoot him with his gun.
What culpability do you feel former President Donald Trump has in what happened on January 6th.
What disturbed me the most was following when it was over, President Trump said that he had done everything, in his words, totally appropriate. I didn't think that was the case. And I know, just to close, Kevin McCarthy, a minority leader for us, Republican leader, called him from his office in the Capitol and said, "Mr. President, call the dogs off. You know, these are your supporters. Tell them to stop. I mean, they're doing a terrible thing for your legacy, et cetera, as we all know." And the president's response, allegedly, that Kevin reported was, "I guess they care more about the election than you did." That's not totally appropriate in my book.
Now, so Congressman, I wanted to ask you about that as we close. The broader issue here. Vice President Kamala Harris said the other day that the threat to our democracy is her biggest concern. Do you feel our democracy is threatened and this represents some sort of broader movement that may undermine our republic?
You know, I sure hope not. I don't know that I could go as far as what she said. I didn't see specifically her comments, but you know, we're a democracy. Every vote should count. I believe that there are the safeguards there to make sure that ballots are counted. But I do think that we have to get to the bottom of what happened a year ago now, January 6th.
All right, back here now with Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. Nolan, let me start with you and ask you to describe what you feel is the political climate in Michigan right now.
You know, we have been making a little progress lately in getting agreements on spending. As much as I sort of objected to the Independent Redistricting Commission and the results it produced, I think had that been left with the legislature and the governor, might never have gotten done. So, I mean, there's just so many things that we can't come to consensus on in this state. And, you know, I think that's in some ways a natural product of having two parties sharing control, but at some point you've got to learn to come to agreement on practical solutions. And we're not consistently getting there today.
Steve, would you agree with that, or how would you describe the political atmosphere?
Yeah, I think it's pretty rotten. And we got to be clear about what is driving a lot of that. I mean, you have one party in this country, in this state, that is increasingly influenced by people who don't want to see everybody have the same access to voting, who want to question institutions like voting in the face of no evidence, of course, that there's any issue. I mean, all of the claims that were made about voting in 2020 turned out to be just false, absolutely false. And yet we hear this constant narrative questioning that. That party, Republican Party, that's influenced by that, it's hard to have a conversation with people who don't want to see the rules executed in a way that's fair to everybody. We've got to have both parties be able to have these conversations on a level playing field when it comes to things like the rules. And we can't do that right now because of these influences on the right side of the political spectrum.
I think one of the problems we have in this country is the emergence of hard partisanship that has taken the place of principle. And this extreme loyalty to party is destructive to the country, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. But to Steve's question, I mean, when he talks about changing the rules, the rules were changed radically in Michigan before the 2020 vote and changed by Democrats. And, you know, the courts checked Jocelyn Benson on some of the rule changes she wanted to force through, but still they forced through a number of them without getting a consensus and without even trying to get in a consensus. And I think that led to the mistrust. We hear Democrats and folks on the left saying, well, gosh, nothing was wrong with the 2020 election. There was no frauds. Everything went as it should. I tend to agree with that. But why then do they want to take the over elections from the states and give it to the federal government, contrary to what the Constitution dictates? If everything went so well in 2020, why do we want to give the federal government such control over a function that's clearly assigned to the states.
So the rules were changed, let's be clear, by the people of Michigan in 2018, radically. It was not Democrats who voted.
That's
we
one
changed,
issue. But before the
it was all of
2020
them.
vote,
It wasn't all of them.
vote,
It wasn't one
Johnson,
issue.
Benson, and Democrats put in all sorts of new rules and requirements.
Let's be clear what she was doing. The constitutional changes in 2018 required all kinds of things to be executed in a way that made sense. They were radical changes that the people voted for. What the Secretary of State was trying to do was make those things work at a practical level at all of these different polling sites in all these different communities. And the question about federal involvement, that is for voter protection, which is the federal government's obligation. It is the reason that we had to have a Voting Rights Act in the first place. It's the reason that the Republicans, for instance, have decimated that legislation and cast it aside and don't want to take it up again, is because what they fear is that it leads to more people of color voting in this country, voting mostly for Democrats, of course. And so Republicans don't want it.
You look at what Democrats are doing in the name of increasing voter participation, 800,000 non-citizens being allowed to vote in New York City. That erodes trust.
Should there be concern less about access and more about the post-vote process? Are we putting emphasis in the wrong place?
You need emphasis on both, but certainly you need some structure in place as we move to this new way of voting. I think vote by mail is here to stay. Early voting's here to stay. I think we'll move into electronic voting. All those changes need to come with processes that should ensure the integrity of the vote, and we're not keeping up.
If we're not keeping up, then you would see all these instances of fraud that people are talking about taking hold, and they're not. There isn't any more fraud now than there was before there was mail-in voting. There's not more voter fraud before early voting.
So I think you're both illustrating the point right now that we are very far apart. And it feels like both Democrats and Republicans, and you can even take party out, or you can just take leaning, that you're entrenching so far now onto either side. So where do we stand?
I think democracy is held very well. You've got more people expected to file for office and run for office in Michigan and across the country this year than ever before. Do we trust the process? I think no, but there's a lot of reasons we don't trust the process, because I think our political leaders have done everything they can possible to break that trust.
There shouldn't be barriers to voting for people who are eligible to vote, whether you have ID or not, which is a matter of all kinds of other conditions that we've invented in this country, should not affect your voting status. And that's why Democrats push back. I think we will see where we are with this democracy with the elections this year. If we see a repeat of the kinds of efforts at disenfranchisement, at disqualification that we saw in 2020, then I think the democracy is under threat.
My thanks to Nolan and Stephen. As we look forward, what kind of impact does increasing partisanship and doubt in government have on our democracy? And what role does the media play in combating misinformation? I met up with the editor and vice president of the Detroit Free Press, Peter Badia, and Michael Barr, the dean of the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy.
A year later, and the investigations continue at the increasing divide between the parties, and several polls have come out just in the last couple of days that even show the difference in how Republicans and Democrats saw what happened last January 6th as either protecting democracy or threatening it. So Michael, let me start with you. How do you think what happened on January 6th and 21 has changed the way the public views our democracy or the strength of it?
Well, I think it highlighted a significant set of weaknesses that we're going to need to be addressing for many, many years to come, maybe even decades. We have so much work to do to try and rebuild the fabric of our society to help people who have very different perspectives on the world relearn how to have conversations with each other across those differences. I think January 6th highlighted an underlying problem, which is that we had a false view that the election in the United States was stolen. And we had politicians who were willing to push that line out. We had media personalities who are willing to push that line out. And lots of people now believe that the election was unlawful. And that's false. It's just a verifiable fact that the election that took place, there was no widespread fraud.
And that really gets into the conversation on misinformation, what truth means to people, and the role of the media. Before we get to that, Peter, Michael brings up a good point. According to that ABC News poll that just came out this week, 65% of Americans believe that Biden's election was legitimate. 65%. It's a very interesting number, but I want to ask you, Peter, going back to the original point of how you believe January 6th has changed the way the public sees our democracy and the strength of it.
Yeah, it's a scary time. I have a 7-year-old grandchild, and I worry about will our society, will our democracy be there for him when he's an adult? Because as Michael just said, it's so hard just to have a fundamental conversation with people about, can our democracy survive? Is our democracy working? What really happened then? That even a third of the country doesn't believe the election was legitimate is deeply, deeply troubling. It runs counter to everything that we stand for as a democratic society. And trying to communicate with people about it through our work has become exponentially more difficult because people are just not willing to believe the truth.
So does that inspire or lead to more civic engagement from people, or does it lead to more estrangement, people pulling back and saying, I don't even want to participate in what I'm seeing, Michael?
So I don't think we're in the worst period in even in modern history, but we're in a very troubling period in our democracy. And it does require civic engagement. It does require all of us to take responsibility for our own work to protect and enhance our democracy. It's one of the reasons why at the University of Michigan, we started a year ago, Democracy and Debate Initiative. And we get students, faculty, and staff involved in thinking about the tough issues, in trying to understand voting rights, in exercising the right to register and to vote. We saw Michigan's, University of Michigan student voting patterns go way up in the last election because there was this civic engagement, this desire to be involved. And I know for our students at the Ford School, at the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, our students are deeply engaged. They are not cynical or detached about the work that has to happen in our democracy.
And so really looking at the next generation. So Peter, do you think that this will enhance people's need or desire to be involved, to be civically engaged, as Michael says?
Well, I think it's important that for those of us who have a role in creating that civic engagement, it makes it very, very important that we take that very seriously. And it has to go beyond the ways we think about journalism. It has to go beyond just writing stories and putting them on our website and printing them in the paper and hope that people take action based upon that. It does require those of us in media, I think, to take a much more aggressive role in terms of civic engagement, in terms of getting out there and talking to people and to listen to people. I know that personally, it can be difficult when somebody just wants to yell at you and say you're part of the cover-up. Mm-hmm. And they use more colorful language than that quite often. But the fact of the matter is we have to be relentless about it. We have to be really aggressive, yes, in our traditional ways, but also in taking that to the public in a way that may be a little less traditional, doing town halls, opening up what's been called mobile newsrooms in communities, getting out, particularly for us, getting out of Metro Detroit and getting out into the rest of the state and hearing what people are thinking and having to say. You have to be very aggressive about it and be willing to listen to people and not immediately label them as kooks, because some of this is coming from a heartfelt place. Some of it is the result of relentless propaganda. I've had a conversation with some of my staffers about how do we cover the future of democracy as a Michigan phenomenon. Our situation in Michigan is different than it is in Georgia, or it is in Pennsylvania, or as it is in, the other so-called battleground states and what have you, where this is most intense, at least where the discussions have been most intense. But we have to make the choice that if it means we cover a few fewer courts, say, or a few fewer police stories, say, in order to spend more time trying to understand the mood and the health of the electorate, and really the health of our democracy here in Michigan, then we need to do that. I can't think of a more important journalistic function in 2022 than that.
I think that there's a really important local and state story to saving our democracy. It's true in Michigan, and it's true all over the country. It's true in a mechanical sense, in the sense that lots of the battleground issues are occurring at the state level. People are fighting about Secretary of State positions in ways that they didn't before, or local election board officials in the ways they didn't before, because they understand how important it is for the integrity of the electoral process. So it matters very much on that. We have ballot initiatives and legislative initiatives that are in the state of Michigan trying to reduce access to the polls. And I think those are significant issues that need to get covered, that are really important for the health of our democracy, again, beginning with voting here in Michigan. And then I do think that the answer to the question how we're going to bring our country together starts in our communities. It doesn't start necessarily at the national level. Can we build a way that people can connect to each other in our communities, begin to rebuild trust in each other, to create a generous sense of belonging, that we're all in this together?
We're going to see this ramped up political activity this year with the House and Senate nationally at stake, with redistricting and everything that means in terms of our local and state elections. It's going to be in a lot of ways more of the same, and I think that's why it puts pressure on us to cover the election in a more healthy way, in a more what really matters to people who live here, what really defines us going forward. Because we have this country, we have profound issues that aren't being addressed, whether it's big global issues like immigration and housing and health and so on, but also more micro issues, the pave the damn roads debate, if it's even a debate in Michigan. So I think our coverage really has to try to get at those and get away from the rhetoric. It's going to be really hard because both the left and the right are going to be banging those drums very, very loudly in 2022.
Michael, from your perspective, what should we be watching?
I do think the most important issue facing the country is the health of our democracy. And I think we need to keep coming back to that theme. We can't take for granted that the elections are going to run smoothly. We can't take for granted that people are going to uphold the constitutional order. I think January 6th called that into question. In the end, our democracy has been strong, but it's definitely been deeply challenged along the way. And I think it's really critical that our media, that our citizenry focus on the hard work every day that is required to preserve a functioning democracy.
Finally, coming up after our show tonight, we invite you to watch the new PBS documentary series called Preserving Democracy, Pursuing a More Perfect Union. It explores the ideals and flaws of democracy, cycles of civil rights progress, and informed citizenship. Take a look.
January 6th revealed that democracy is a lot more fragile than I thought it was. I knew that intellectually as a historian and as a scholar, but watching that on TV and watching it transpire drove that home for me in a way that it hadn't before.
We're in the crucible right now. We're in the midst of that conflict, that ongoing, seemingly redundant conflict in American history. The conflict over voter access, the conflict over basic democracy, all that's going on right now. And if we wanted to understand, anything about this particular moment, then history is our guide.
Preserving Democracy airs right after 1 Detroit, right here at 9 p.m. That is going to do it for us tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. For the stories you saw on tonight's show, our extended interviews, and more on our Election 2020 Detroit to DC project with the Detroit Free Press, just go to our website at onedetroitpbs.org. Find us on social media at One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald, and for all of us at Detroit Public Television, have a good night and take care.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, MASCO Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. MASCO, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support for this program is provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV, the KRESGE Foundation, Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Also brought to you by, and viewers like you.